The year is 1888. The place Whitechapel, a district in London's East End. Gas lamps cast long, menacing shadows down narrow cobbled streets. Fog hangs heavy in the air, thick with the smell of coal smoke and poverty. This is the stage for a series of horrifying crimes that would give birth to a legend, a phantom known only as Jack the Ripper. For over a century, the world has been obsessed with his identity, his motives, his grisly methods. But in our search for the monster, we have often forgotten the real people at the heart of this tragedy. The women. This is not another story about Jack the Ripper. This is the story of Mary Ann, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane. It's time to look beyond the sensational headlines and rediscover the lives they lived, not just the way they died. Our story begins with Mary Ann Nichols, often called Polly. Born in 1845, she was a mother of 5. Her life wasn't easy. She had been married to a printer's machinist, William Nichols, but their marriage crumbled under the weight of his alleged infidelity and her struggles with alcohol. By 1888, Polly was estranged from her family, moving between grim workhouses and dose houses, cheap lodging establishments where a few pennies bought you a bed for the night. Friends described her as a clean and quiet woman, someone who, despite her hardships, tried to maintain a sense of dignity. In the days leading up to her death, she was trying to earn the 4pence she needed for a bed. She was last seen alive, telling a friend she had earned her lodging money 3 times over but had spent it on drink. She was a woman trapped by circumstance, a familiar face in the bleak landscape of the East End, just trying to survive one more night. A little over a week later, the killer struck again. This time, the victim was Annie Chapman. Born Annie Eliza Smith in 1840, she was known for her intelligence and her dark, wavy hair. Annie had also seen better days. She was married to a coachman, John Chapman, and they had 3 children. They were a respectable working-class family until tragedy struck. One child died of meningitis, and another was born with a disability. The grief took its toll, and both Annie and her husband began to drink heavily. After their separation and John's death from liver disease, Annie's life spiraled further. She received a small allowance from her late husband's family, but her dependence on alcohol often left her penniless. She scraped by, selling crochet work and flowers, and sometimes resorting to sex work to afford a bed. Those who knew her described her as generally inoffensive, though prone to arguments when she'd been drinking. On the morning of her death, she was feeling unwell but was forced out of her lodging house because she didn't have the money for her bed. She was seen talking to a man near the very spot where her body would later be found. Annie's story is one of a slow, tragic decline, a life eroded by loss and addiction. The night of September 30th brought a new level of terror to London, an event that would become known as the Double Event. The first victim of the night was Elizabeth Stride. Born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter in Sweden in 1843. She had a life marked by upheaval from an early age. After moving to London, she married a carpenter named John Stride, and for a time, they ran a coffee shop. But the marriage failed, and like the others, Elizabeth found herself adrift in the poverty of the East End. She was known to her friends as Long Liz, a nickname that might have referred to her height or her surname. She was described as a calm and good-tempered woman, though she sometimes fabricated stories, claiming her husband and children had died in a tragic steamboat accident. In reality, her husband had died of tuberculosis, and they had no children. On the night she died, she had just finished her cleaning duties at her lodging house and was heading out into the night. She was seen multiple times, arguing with a man and later being embraced by another. Her life was cut short in a dark yard, a fleeting encounter that ended in tragedy. She was a woman far from home, whose dreams of a better life in a new country had dissolved into a daily struggle for survival. Less than an hour after Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered, the killer claimed his second victim of the night, Catherine E. Born in 1842, Catherine was a vibrant and intelligent woman with a fiery spirit. She was known for her cheerful disposition and her talent for mimicry. For over 20 years, she lived with a man named Thomas Conway, and they had 3 children together. They traveled the country, selling cheap books and ballads that Thomas wrote, but the relationship was volatile, marked by heavy drinking and fights, and they eventually separated. Catherine then found companionship with a man named John Kelly, and they lived together in a lodging house in By all accounts, they were deeply fond of each other. On the night of September 29th, Catherine had been arrested for being drunk and disorderly, a common offense in the area. She was released from the police station at 1 in the morning, sober and cheerful, joking with the officer on duty. As she walked back towards Spitalfields, she gave her name as Mary Ann Kelly, an eerie and tragic coincidence. She was last seen talking to a man in Mitre Square, the very place where her life would end minutes later. Catherine S.'s story is one of resilience and a search for love and stability in a world that offered very little of either. The final canonical victim was Mary Jane Kelly. Her story is the most enigmatic. Much of what we know about her comes from her own accounts, which were often contradictory and romanticized. She was much younger than the other victims, likely in her mid-20s. She claimed to have been born in Ireland and to have lived a well-to-do life in Wales before her husband died in a mining accident. She said she had spent time in a high-class brothel in London's West End and even lived in Paris for a short while. Whether any of this was true is impossible to say. What is certain is that by 1888, she was living in a small, single room at 13 Miller's Court. She was described as a beautiful woman with fair hair and blue eyes, known for her kindness and high spirits. Unlike the other women, she had a permanent, albeit squalid, room of her own, which she had furnished with a few modest possessions. She was deeply in arrears with her rent and had been turning to sex work to make ends meet. On the evening of November 8th, she was heard singing Irish songs in her room. In the early hours of the morning, neighbors heard a faint cry of, "Oh, murder," but it was dismissed as a common sound in the area. Her death was the most brutal of all, a horrifying end for a young woman whose life, real or imagined, was full of untold stories. To understand why these women were so vulnerable, we must understand the world they inhabited. The East End of 1888 was a place of extreme deprivation. It was a maze of overcrowded, unsanitary slums. Disease was rampant, and life expectancy was low. For a woman without the protection of a husband or family, options were stark. Low-paying, back-breaking work in factories or as domestic servants was one path. The workhouse, with its strict rules and separation of families, was another. For many, sex work was not a choice but a last resort, a desperate means to earn the few pennies needed for a meal or a bed for the night. These women lived on the absolute margins of society. They were visible, yet invisible, seen on the streets, but ignored by the polite society that profited from their labor and judged their circumstances. They were not just victims of a single killer. They were victims of a system that offered them little hope and even less protection. Their poverty made them accessible, their transient lifestyles made them easy targets, and the general disregard for their lives meant their disappearances might initially go unnoticed. For too long, the stories of Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane have been eclipsed by the dark shadow of their killer. They have been reduced to a collective now, the victims. Their names have become answers in a true crime quiz, their deaths a spectacle for public consumption. But they were so much more than that. They were daughters, wives, and mothers. They had hopes and fears, friends they laughed with, and sorrows they bore. They fought to survive in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. By remembering them as individuals, by saying their names and telling their stories, we do more than just solve a historical puzzle. We restore a measure of the dignity that was so brutally stolen from them. We are reminded that behind every headline and every statistic of violent crime, there are human beings. There are lives lived and futures lost. Let's not remember them for how they died, but for the fact that they lived. Thank you for watching.